Cal, would you open us in prayer? Well, I catch my breath.
Father, thank you for the time we have together here. Thank you for your word. We ask that you would bless those of us who are present this morning. You would open our minds and our hearts that we would be able to understand it. Continue to these things we pray in Jesus' holy name.
Amen. So, if you saw this week's reading, Monday's reading was repeated the week before. I had that messed up, so you missed out on reading Isaiah probably 18 through 20 and chapter 30, 31. But we're going to talk about it. Which is basically the judgment, God's judgment against Ethiopia, Egypt, and Assyria. Then we're going to look at the last years of Hezekiah's reign, two major incidences that are in there. We're going to look at the spiritual decline of Judah under Hezekiah's son Manasseh. We're just going to get introduced to him because he has an interesting story that we want to really pay attention to. And then we will look at, the Lord willing on time, Isaiah's message, chapter 40 through 48, which is the promise of restoration, the promise of the Messiah, and all that God is working out. It's really the purpose, the plan of God laid out. Now, here's something as we study, especially the Isaiah parts. Something you can take away from this. If you want to know the validity of the Bible, look at how hard the critic works to disprove it or discount it. What do I mean by that? Isaiah is going to say some outlandish things if you do not believe in inspiration of the Scripture. What does that mean? He is going to name names, give places, times, locations of things that are going to occur hundreds and hundreds of years in advance. And we'll look at this, where God says, I'm going to do this so when it happens, you can't say I knew it. Okay? But he's laying it out, saying this is what's going to happen, and it was so accurate. It causes the critic such consternation that they spend their effort to discount and disprove it. They do the same thing with Daniel. Basically, you look at it, and then what they'll say is, this had to be written after the fact, which actually validates it was 100% accurate, because they will not accept a God, an omnipotent, omniscient creator, who knows the end from before the beginning. And that'll be something to watch for. Yeah, Bob? Before the fact. Yeah, he's going to say something, and it's going to be before the fact. They're going to catch up. And when they look at it, they're going to say, the author, the critic is going to say, oh, this had to be written after. It had to be written after because it's so accurate. So let's get started. In chapter 18, it's here's something to remember. Last week, we looked at Hezekiah. Hezekiah comes on the scene as the king after his dad, Ahaz, who was a wicked king. Hezekiah he got rid of idolatry in Jerusalem and in Judah. He instituted the Passover. He even invited the other 10 tribes to come and celebrate, and many did. He basically was instrumental in bringing revival to the nation as a whole. Even though the northern tribe was dismantled, as it were, by the Assyrians and tossed away, judged by God, there were those who were around that celebrated it. But typical to anyone, anywhere, who takes a very strong commitment to serve God, shortly thereafter, or the enemy will move quickly to attack. And that's what happens with Hezekiah. It's typical to his efforts. You take a strong, powerful stand for God, and the enemy will attack you. That's what happened to Hezekiah. The enemy does this. His desire is to dislodge you from serving God. He'll bring difficulty. He does it in two ways. Basically, if you watch how Satan works, he has two modes of operation. One is a seduction. What do I mean? He'll bring something along and say, well, if you do this, I will give you this. The lust of the eye, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life, John says, right? Well, if you stand for God and you reject, let's just call it the easy way, which is often what he's doing, He then comes along and he'll work from a fear perspective. And that's what he did with Hezekiah first. He came from the fear side. He brings Assyria into Judah. Now, by the way, if you remember when we studied Ahaz, God, remember, sent Isaiah to Ahaz and said, I'll give you a sign. He says, I don't want a sign because I'd be tempting the Lord. Very pious. He was a liar. And God gave him a sign. But then for Ahaz's sin, God said, because of your sin, and remember, it's not just the sin of Ahaz, but the people went along with it. You know, it would have been one thing if Ahaz had been off doing his own thing, and the people had stayed true to God, but they went along with it. And God said, I'm going to bring trouble on you. And that's what he did. And we would look at it and say, well, God, Hezekiah has brought all this great reform back. Well, what does Galatians say? Do not be deceived, God is not mocked. Do you know what he says after that? You reap what you sow. Whatever you sow, you're going to reap. And see, the Judean people, the people of Judah, had sinned with idolatry, and God said there's a consequence. And Assyria comes in and attacks them. Now, interesting, as you read the story, what you see was Hezekiah was young, 25 years old when he became king. And he was on fire for the Lord. He did everything for God. Well, he comes along in about his 14th year. We'll get to this, because the numbers are actually given to us. And the Assyrians finally come in, because what he did is, remember when we read it, was Ahaz has been paying money to Assyria. He became king, says, I ain't doing it no more. I'm serving the Lord. I'm not going to pay this guy. I'm going to trust God to protect me. And Assyria, in the 14th year, attacks. And what we see from Isaiah's message is Isaiah comes along and he's telling the people, and he's particularly Hezekiah, don't be trusting in Ethiopia. And what we'll find is that's probably what his counselors, his handlers, his advisors were telling him to do. What you also have is that the king of Egypt, who was actually Ethiopian at the time, So was his name, and he was over in 2 Kings 17. He's the one that kind of worked Hoshea, the last king of the northern tribe, to rebel against Assyria. And what he didn't realize, Hoshea, was that he was a pawn. The Pharaoh of Egypt said, my biggest enemy is Assyria. I'm going to get somebody else to fight my battle. And that's what he did. And what happened? Well, that initiated the final doom of Israel. And what we have here is likely that So is making the same overtures to Hezekiah. He wants somebody else to fight his battle. And God comes against him. He describes the Ethiopian as a formidable nation. They were tall. They were feared far and wide. They were an oppressive nation. They were powerful. Everybody was watching what Ethiopia was doing. It's kind of like today. You know, you have, what is Russia doing? What is China doing? What is America doing? That's the kind of nation. They were largely influential. They had attacked and defeated Egypt at this time, and they were basically a ruler in Egypt. And during time, they had established a 25th Egyptian dynasty, okay? And they were about power. And that's what as you read the prophets, Ethiopia, he had this global expansion idea. And what he wanted was somebody to defeat his biggest threat, which was Assyria. Now, God in chapter 18 of Isaiah says, I am quietly watching. That's the picture he says. This is this picture where God, in his sovereignty, uses man's free will. He says, I see what Ethiopia is doing. And he says, I'm going to stay in my chambers. I'm going to watch from heaven. And I'm going to let it play out. Why? Well, because I know what's going on. I know the end from before the beginning. I know what he's going to do. And it's going to, quote unquote, play into my hand. It's going to be what I want. And he says, but, this is the warning Isaiah gives, at the harvest, in other words, real soon, I'm going to prune him. I'm going to cut him down. And the birds of the air are going to feast on the remains of the Ethiopians. That is exactly what happens. And so his warning to Hezekiah is don't trust in him. Why? Because it's a temporal government or power. Because, see, Hezekiah has taken a stand opposite of his dad. His dad was making all these alliances, and God just said they're going to lead you astray. What he's telling Hezekiah, he's training Hezekiah is to trust in the Lord. Lean on the Lord. Trust on him with your whole heart. Lean not on your own understanding. God sees the plans of the wicked. He's not threatened or worried about their schemes. And he lets them play out. And we see this throughout history. And it always is played out. The real key is trust God. In Ecclesiastes, Solomon says, because the sentence against the evil deed is not executed quickly, therefore the hearts of the sons of men among them are given to fully do evil. Ethiopia is doing what they're doing. They're trusting in themselves. They see themselves as pretty much invincible. So who's going to stop them? Why should they stop? Humanly speaking. And God says to Hezekiah, don't fall for it. And that's always that's always our warning. You know, God's always warning us, don't fall for it. The chapter concludes with Isaiah describing a future time when the people of Cush, which is Ethiopia and modern Sudan, will bring gifts to God in Jerusalem. And it looks towards the day of the reign of Christ. Because what you're going to also get in this picture of Isaiah's message against these pagan nations is we have a repeating theme of God's eternal plan of salvation to all the nations, which is exactly what Christ said. If I am lifted up, I will draw all men unto myself. And Peter, God is not willing that any should perish, but all should come to repentance. And that's a big picture. So Ethiopia, God is going to judge. Don't trust in him, Hezekiah. But the day is coming when God will do a restoration in Ethiopia. Then in chapter 18, now we have 19, he gives a message focusing on God's judgment against Egypt, the nation proper, right? And also has a prophecy of Egypt's future repentance and restoration. And it ties back to chapter 18. Now what he talks about in chapter 19 is the judgment against Egypt will come in three areas. First, they'll have civil strife, is what he laid out. They'll have an economic collapse, okay? And they'll have a foolish or weak leadership. I don't know if you read that, you should be looking around going, we're in trouble. Because I don't know if you know this, but you're living in a house of cards economically. Our money is funny money. You know what the basis of American money is? What's that? Printing press. The key is the good faith and will of the U.S. government. What does that mean? It means trust me. Yeah, it means trust me. It's like walking on the street corner and somebody bought a home computer and a color printer and they printed up Cecil dollars. And he's going on, it's good, trust me. That's all you've got. Do we have economic problems? Yeah. Do we have civil strife? Yeah. Do we have pretty much weak leadership? What is weak leadership? You know what weak leadership is? Which way is the wind blowing? Today. That's what it is. That's the thing. This is not unusual. He said this is pretty typical of what happens to nations. And it doesn't necessarily come in these orders. It actually, I take our country, it started with weak leadership. Basically, the curse was actually the television. Because we stopped voting and hiring on content, it was how they appeared on screen. The soundbite. Yeah. I watched a thing with Newt Gingrich once, and he was a history guy, and he said, you know, that Lincoln never did a speech for a soundbite. He had thought out logical arguments, and the idea was you would hear it today, and you go home and mull it over between now and the next time you read or heard, because he believed that if he did that, that you would come to the logical, sensible conclusion. Today we have people voting because, what does it look like on TV? Yeah. What does it look like on TV? The pattern is common throughout history and scriptures. When people abandon the true God, they start falling for anything and everything. Okay? Now here's the thing. God here portrays himself as the catalyst of the judgment. But who is the judgment? Well, ultimately it's going to be Assyria, who so feared. But it's going to start with internal civil war. What was the internal civil war? Well, Ethiopia had conquered Egypt. And when the people who were under his domain or dominion decided they didn't like it, you had a civil war. And it took, what does a civil war do to a nation? It depletes its natural resources and sidetracks them from anything productive. They don't move forward. And what it does is it weakens them. And then Assyria, seeing the weakness, moves in. God says, I'm coming in as a cloud. I'm the one who's behind this. Why? Well, remember, what did God do with Moses? He attacked the 10 primary deities of Egypt. Okay? But the issue was, Egypt didn't learn. They capitulated. They let the people go. But they, like most people, went right back to their sins. And God says, well, I'm coming again, because it says when he comes in, he makes all their idols tremble and fall. In other words, everything they trust in, they go to every one of their deities, and they find out the civil war doesn't end, Assyria wins. Then he says, I send a drought. He says, I sent a drought to the point that the Nile River dried up. If you know anything about the Nile River, for that thing to dry up, they had a severe drought. A very severe drought. I often wonder, because I don't know the history, I'm wondering if that's where basically the Sahara Desert came from. Big enough, long enough, things die. Who knows? It was designed to demonstrate God's power, and he's trying to call them, because in the end, he's going to reach back to Egypt and redeem them. And we read that, we're like, oh, that's really strange. But it's not that strange. It's not that strange. He says at one point there's going to be an altar to God in Egypt. And that is actually what happened. Matter of fact, there were 5 predominant cities that the Jews established culture in. And one of them erected an altar after the fall. Anybody ever hear of the Coptic Christians? The Coptic Christians were in Alexandria. Coptic Christians were formed or started, or the seed was sown by Mark. Okay? The Coptic Christians were the first, let's say, that's where Christianity first took the deep root, because they had the library there, they had the real intellectual part, the research, the theological development was in Alexandria under the Coptics. And they still hold, they're the largest Christian group in the Middle East. And this is what God said back here in Isaiah, that the people would know of the Lord. Now, it's interesting because the Coptics, long before Martin Luther, by about 10 centuries, the Coptic Christians broke with Rome over all that they were doing. But this is what God had said would happen. He said he's going to establish him. It was the first seat of Gentile Christianity. In other words, the idea of not like an organized church per se, but where it became, I look at it like the idea of we're going to develop the theology and we're going to do writings and have information. It was really a powerful thing. And they're still there. They still, like, I think it says, I was doing some research, I think they're 20% of the Egyptian population, which is, it's a language they speak. It's a dialect, but it's really kind of interesting. It illustrates that God's judgment does ultimately lead to repentance and ultimately restoration. That's what his goal was. And he says he's going to do it for Assyria. He's going to do it with Egypt. He says he's going to do it with Assyria. You know, in Romans, Paul says, is God the God of the Jews only? Is he not the God of the Gentiles? And that's rhetorical. The answer is yes. There's only one God. So who created the Ethiopian, the Egyptians, the Arabs, the Scottish? Wherever you're from, who created them? God. So don't, people kind of get their little blinders on and they build little boxes for God and they say, well, here's where God's working. He's working in our neighborhood. And, churches get into this. It's us. It's like, no, it's not us. It's only us, right? So that's where he starts out with. And he also makes a promise. He judges Assyria. Same story with Assyria. He says, I'm going to use Assyria. They're going to do my purposes. And he says, but because they do it with a vengeful heart, a prideful heart, those are both sins. He says, I'm going to judge them. Because who does vengeance belong to? God. See, so when the Assyria did it in vengeance, God said, you've sinned. When they said they did it of their own power and might, we're going to look at this, they sinned. But he says at this point, he says the day will come when there'll be a road from Egypt and Ethiopia to Assyria. And he says he'll restore them. You do know that that area, that what was it called? The Islamic Brotherhood. You remember when they were big? In Syria, there were a couple 100,000 Christians. And as our news kind of focused on everything else, they didn't talk about it. The Islamics went in and killed about 200,000 Christians. Wiped out the Christianity in Lebanon. They've been wiped out. And in Syria. But God says the day's coming when there'll be a restoration and they'll be brought all together. Now, he introduces us to I want to move through this, the last years of Hezekiah. And this is what I talked about. Assyria attacks Judah. God judges Assyria. Stage one. Okay? I'm going to give you the 30,000-foot view because it's really important about it. Hezekiah, the young king, he's been doing what's right, and trouble comes his way. Understand that that's the possibility that happens to believers all the time. And we want to ask that three-letter word. Why? Well, in all of this, God is working. One, he is training. Two, he is testing. Okay? And three, in this case, he is allowing Syria to do it so he can judge Assyria. Now, what happens is Assyria comes in, and Hezekiah, as I said, his initial reaction is to respond politically. He says, you know what, I've sinned, I'll start giving you money. He's listening to people. Isaiah just told him, don't trust in Ethiopia, don't trust in Egypt. Okay? And what he finds is, as Ahaz found, is once he paid off the Assyrian king, what did the Assyrian king do? He came after more. And you know what he realized? This isn't political. I can't solve this politically, which is a powerful thing. That's good for us. When we look at things and say, you know what? The answer is not of the world. It's of God, and we have to go to him. Now, then he may tell you to go this way in the world and do something, but we got to go to God. And so what he does is he goes to God. First off, he does prepare for war, and he gets overrun. So he says, I can't take it militarily. I'm not there yet. He did do some things that we read about, and they've discovered archaeologically. They found the water tunnel that he built, because that was the issue. They built a siege, and you'd run out of water, you couldn't survive. So Hezekiah built a tunnel that they found where the water comes into Jerusalem, into the cisterns, and that would have been good, okay? But he says, I'm not going to respond politically. I'm going to respond spiritually. I'm going to go to God. And as he does this, so here's what happens. There's a guy named Sennacherib, okay? He's the king, and he has come through and wiped out all of Judah. He's in the town of Lachish, okay? And as he's at Lachish, he sends Ramchakan down to Jerusalem and says, you're next, boys. And what he does is he's trying to intimidate Hezekiah. He's trying to put fear in the people. Like I said, how does Satan work? Well, if he can't seduce you, he will work with fear. And so he sends down an army, and he surrounds the city. And he's saying, I'm coming to get you. Hezekiah, hearing this, sends men to Isaiah. Isaiah, when they arrive, says, the Lord, because you came to me. Because you came to me. Here's the answer. Now remember, Ahaz, his father, when confronted by Israel and Syria, He hired Asyria. And God says, well, for that you're going to pay. Hezekiah doesn't go that way. He calls on God, and God says to Isaiah, you go tell him, I'm going to deliver him. He says to the point, he says, this man is not going to enter your gates. He's not going to come through your walls. He's not even going to fire a single arrow into the city. Okay, that's what he says to him. Now, while this is all going on, guess what God has done? He is sat in heaven and he watched the Ethiopians. What did the Ethiopians do? Well, Hezekiah had already made this alignment. They come up against him. So Sennacherib, hearing that Assyria is coming, withdraws his troops from Jerusalem. And as he does, says, don't think that you're going to get away. We're going to come back. And they go and they fight Ethiopia. And what happened with Ethiopia? God cut them off. Assyria was victorious. And when they came back, they made this. They came back, and what Ramshachan said, he ridiculed Hezekiah. He ridiculed the people. And what was interesting was they spoke in the Hebrew tongue. The Bible notes they spoke in the Hebrew tongue because there were soldiers on the wall, and they were trying to scare them. And Hezekiah's men said, talk to us in Aramaic, we understand it. And they go, oh, no, we're here to talk to these people on the wall. And they were boasting great things about themselves. And that's the pictures you read it. You say, who are they trusting in? They saw themselves. They trusted in horses and chariots. They trusted in their power, in their military might. And they ascribed all their victories to themselves. God has already said that you won because I sent you. And he boasts about his God. He goes, what other gods are there that can win because we've defeated them all? And what's happening now is Sennacherib is blaspheming God, because that's what God says. I've heard him blaspheme my name. What he did is he took God from his high throne and brought him down to all the other local deities because they had a warped picture of God. We saw this when Assyria took Israel. They said, oh, their God locally needs sacrifices done this way. And because we're not doing that locally in northern Israel, the lions have come in. So the Assyrians said, well, get a priest and send them back and do the thing. In their mind, God is a local deity. He has an area, that's his area. He doesn't go outside of it, right? Our God's bigger because we're overtaking these areas. And God says, I'm going to take care of this. And Hezekiah, he then sends a letter. And I love what Hezekiah did with this letter. Because, by the way, when he sent men to Isaiah, he says, through his men, he says to Isaiah, inquire of, this is important, your God. Did you catch it? In other words, I don't know him, but you do. You go talk to him. He gets this letter, and Isaiah takes a big step. Hezekiah takes a big step. He takes the letter, and he goes down to the temple before the altar. And I love what he does. It's very picturesque. He takes the letter, and he lays it out before the Lord. He says, here's what's going on. Look at what they're saying about you, Lord. And if you read Hezekiah's prayer, his prayer is about God, not Hezekiah and not about Judah, in the sense that, God, they're talking about you and your people, which we are. They're talking about you. And again, God says he'll take care of them. He says it's going to happen. He says it's going to happen that the king is going to withdraw from Jerusalem. He's going to go home, and back at home, he's going to be killed. And it says, here's God's note in 2 Chronicles 32. Be strong and courageous, do not fear or be dismayed because of the king of Assyria, nor because of all the horde that is with him. For the one, this is Hezekiah's message to the people. This is his faith. For the one with us is greater than the one with him. With him is only the arm of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God to help and to fight our battles. Pride, pride, pride. It kills, it kills, it kills. The king said, don't trust. The king of Assyria kept telling him, don't trust, don't trust. And Hezekiah trusted. And God says, in a moment, in a night, and that's what happened. He sent a plague in the night and killed 185,000 Assyrians. He retreated to his hometown, and that's where he died. His 2 sons killed him. Now, do you have that slide? Sennacherib, this is really cool. I want to show you all right, this here is a wall, a replica of the wall in Nineveh, which is where Sennacherib returned to. And this relief is of him defeating Lachish. Lachish was the last city he defeated. He did not record Jerusalem because he lost. Now, is there another slide? Okay, you can just pull it up and I can just talk to it real quick. This is from Harvard University's museum. It's a replica of the actual one that is in the British Museum. But there's an archaeologist who does these videos on biblical discoveries. And yeah, here, your handout has the URL for this link. But that picture there, we don't need to run it, but that is Nineveh there, that big hill. And when they dug it up, they found Sennacherib's palace. And in that palace, they found a wall like this length, a relief of the conquest of Lachish. And he's just bragging about what he did. But it establishes that he never entered Jerusalem. Because Lachish was secondary. It'd be like saying, well, we defeated Cleveland, but we didn't take New York or LA or Chicago. We won't talk about that. Let's just talk about Cleveland or Knoxville or someplace. Lachish was a big city, but it wasn't predominant. It was on the western side. But anyhow, Hezekiah is given victory. And you think, hey, great. Well, here's the problem. So that's good. This guy, you have a link, the URL in your handout. And he does really good stuff he's a Christian archaeologist, and he'll tell you, hey, this is what they find. They're finding all kinds of things. They found stuff where they can, the date in the Bible, you can pinpoint the date because of events based on archaeological discoveries. Interesting, this relief here, this is what it says. This is what Sennacherib put up on his relief. Because Hezekiah, king of Judah, would not submit to my yoke, I came up against him, and by force and arms and mighty power I took 46 of his strong fenced cities, and the smaller towns that were scattered about. I took and plundered a countless number. For these places I took and carried off 200,156 people, old and young, male and female, together with horses, mules, asses, camels, ox, sheep, and countless multitudes. Now, the Greek historian Herodotus, he validates the destruction of the Assyrian army. And his record says that mice came into the camp. Okay, we don't know. God doesn't tell. He just says, I sent a plague. He says, I sent the angel of death, and it killed 185,000. He went back, and just like Isaiah said, he was killed by his sons, and he was done with. So what happens? Well, around the same time, and it's not exactly spelled out, but here's what's important. Hezekiah became king at 25. He served 29 years. In his 14th year, Assyria came up against him. Okay? And this is important. And during this time, Hezekiah became ill. Ill to the point of death that God sent Isaiah in and said, you're going to die. Get your house in order. I'd like to have that one. So what do you think? Well, what did Hezekiah do? What would you do? Talk to God. It says he turned. Actually, it says he wept bitterly. He really put his heart out. And he says, God, basically says, I'm really not ready to die. Part of it was he had no heirs. If he had no heirs, somebody else was going to get the throne. And he says, I've been faithful and I've done all this. In Isaiah, before he can leave the palace, God says, go on back and tell him I'm going to give him 15 years. And if you look at Hezekiah's life, you may say, wow, that's cool. But I look at it and say, maybe that's why God doesn't tell us. Because it says that God when he gave Hezekiah the 15 years, he delivered him from Sennacherib, it says, he did not return the favor in kind to God, but his heart became prideful. We're all susceptible to it. We're all susceptible to it. Be committed to God, doing God's thing. God does great things, and we somehow think, I stuck in my thumb and I pulled out a plum, and what a good boy am I. We kind of give it to ourselves. And as God says, for that, he sent in trouble. He sent trouble in. Now, was that the Assyrians? Because it says then, but then Hezekiah's heart came because he humbled himself, and he prospered, but then he humbled himself. And it's interesting because, again, I go back to the other stories in the Bible. You may remember Ahaziah was a king of Israel. When he got sick, he sent to the pagan gods to get an answer if he was going to survive. And God sent Elijah, and he says, is there not a God in Israel? Because you didn't inquire of me, you're going to die. And he did. He fell through the lattice, and God said, you're going to die. Hezekiah told he's going to die. He calls out to God, and God heals him. And he has 15 years. All good, right? Well, Hezekiah, as I said, had no heirs. In his third year of being healed, he has a son. Anybody remember his name? Manasseh. Now, Manasseh is going to be the longest reigning king in Judah and Israel. Which, if you know the story, we'll get to it, you would be going like, why him? Why not Josiah? Why not Uzziah? Why not Hezekiah? Okay? So Hezekiah gets healed, and he's going to get 15 years. After his healing, the Babylonians king sends him gifts and letters, congratulatory letters. And that plays to what? Anybody? The king gets a letter from the Babylonian king saying, we're so glad you're alive and you made it. It's paying to his pride. And he takes them around and he shows them everything. And Isaiah comes to him as they leave and said, what'd you show him? He goes, everything. He goes, not a good idea. Because these same people are going to come back one day and take everything. I don't believe that they were really that interested in Hezekiah. I think they had two things. One is they were glad that, in their mind, Hezekiah has done to Assyria what Ethiopia and Egypt couldn't do. Why? Because they'd already had skirmishes between Assyria and Babylon, because Babylon was on the ascension. And they were just glad. But here's the thing. If these guys beat Assyria, how mighty are they? They want to know everything about their enemy. That's why I believe they were there. God let it happen. Because he's already told Judah, for Ahaz's sin and the other sins of the other kings, that they're going to get judged because they're not going to come back. Well, Manasseh is the guy that finally locked that door, that they were on that train and they weren't getting off it. Because his sin is great. Because when Hezekiah dies, Manasseh becomes king. And he was 12 years old. He reigned 55 years in Jerusalem. Quote, 2 Chronicles 33:2, he did evil in the sight of the Lord according to the abominations of the nations whom the Lord disposed before the sons of Israel. Remember, when God sent them in the land under Joshua, he says, you're kicking them out, and then he listed all their sins. And it says Manasseh did worse than all of them. He did worse than Ahab. You got to scratch your head and say, how could that be? Whereas Hezekiah removed idolatry, Manasseh reestablished it. He did more evil than all the other kings. He built altars to the hosts of heaven. God makes a big deal about this because, see, the idea of astrology, the zodiac and all that, it came out of Babylon, okay? It came out of Babylon, out of the flood, the Tower of Babel and all that. That's where it came from. As a matter of fact, when Babylon falls, and we'll get to this, to the Medes and Persians, their soothsayers and all, they headed out. You know where they ended up at? Pergama. Anybody remember the name Pergama? Pergama is in the book of Revelation of 7 churches, and God says, I know where you're at. You're at the seat of Satan. God is real big against this stuff with astrology. It's demonic. The Ouija board and all that stuff. Because it says that he did the host of heavens. He erected altars. He made his sons pass through the fire. He practiced witchcraft, divination, and sorcery. He dealt with mediums and spiritualists. That is all wrapped up. God has commended. This is not the first time. It will not be the last time he condemns it. But he makes a big point that God is opposed to it. And his sin is the basis or the primary cause of the eventual destruction of Jerusalem. And you have that in 2 Kings 21 and 2 Chronicles 33. He was more wicked than the Amorites. And he shed, it says, very much blood until Jerusalem was filled from one end to another. In other words, we have one record of Ahab killing innocent blood in Naboth vineyard, right? Well, it says that Hezekiah he filled the whole city. And tradition tells us that Isaiah is sawn asunder by Manasseh. Okay? Because if you go back and read the front of Isaiah, he served in the 4 kings, and he didn't really serve Manasseh. And in Hebrews it talks about some for their faith were sawn asunder, and tradition tells that was Isaiah. He stood up against it. See, Manasseh, it seems like anybody who stood against Manasseh in his sin, he had him killed. Now, we look at it and say, wicked Manasseh. But I guarantee you, Manasseh is not the one that would have sawn him asunder. Manasseh is not the one that killed innocent people. It was other people. And if you remember, when Saul told his guards to kill the priest, they wouldn't do it. And he had to get the heathen, his shepherd guy, to do it. He pulled out the sword and killed the priests. See, the people went along with Manasseh. So when God judged him, God was right in their judgment. Now, we'll get more into Manasseh's life next week. That's in your reading for this week. And we'll find out more about Manasseh. But right now it looks pretty black or bleak with Manasseh. He's a really bad guy. And here's the thing. I'll give you a sneak preview. Even when he turns back to God, too little, too late. The nation never recovered. That's why it's important as believers to realize that people are always watching. You know? Now, we're going to try to get through the 9 chapters of Isaiah, but there's some really good things here. And this is all a promise of Messiah and restoration, and there's judgment on the nations. And in this section, Isaiah will give messages about Judah, about Israel as a whole, with the promise, and this is the key, the promise. And again, some of these things have happened, and they happened exactly as God said they would. Again, I go back to that the critic, that's what he likes to attack because it said it can't be true. It'd be like you saying, well, here's going to be the final score for the Super Bowl next year, and you gave all the information, 4,000 years from now, they said, well, he had to write that after the fact, or you had to write it after the fact. So they have this idea, if you think about it, the nation, we see Hezekiah, we're on the high plane, we're blessed of God, we're going with God. It's going to all, if we just stay on this road, well, any hope of continued blessing is quickly destroyed with Manasseh. Because it doesn't appear like he wasted any time. He was 12 years old when he became king. So more than likely what happened was those handlers of Hezekiah conformed to Hezekiah, but their hearts weren't right with God. Because somebody came in and said, let's look at this, let's do this. Quite likely, remember Hezekiah's mother was the daughter of Zechariah, who was one of the Levites that restored the temple. So Hezekiah probably had a godly mother who gave him godly instruction. Manasseh, on the other hand, had somebody who didn't lead him in God's way. And it derailed the nation's spiritual walk with God. You see, the sins are egregious, and the key is the people willingly followed. And as I read that, that's what just keeps coming back to me. And that's why when God talks, he's always talking to the nation. I mean, if it was just the sin of Manasseh and he was the only one doing it, God would have been talking to him. But he's always talking to the nation because they're following along willfully. They're willfully going there. And that's always an indictment for us because our world's going off the rails. And we have to make a choice every day. Am I going to go with them? Right? Am I going to go with them? His message is to bring comfort to the exiles of the future. See, what happens is God says, you're all going to be deported to Babylon, like 800 some miles away. And when you're there, just understand, he says in Isaiah 40, comfort, yes, comfort my people. Speak comfort to Jerusalem and cry out to her, for her warfare is ended, her iniquity is pardoned, for she has received from the Lord double for all of her sins. The point is, you're going to be off in captivity, and you're going to think there's no future for us. And think about it. Israel, Judah, the only nation that's ever been devastated like this and deported and dispersed, that's ever held this identity. Otherwise, they just kind of meld in and dissipate. You know, what is I remember as kids, we were told America was the great melting pot. And what did that mean? Well, as everybody came here, they kind of along the lines lost that ethnic identity. They became Americans. They were no longer whatever, French, German, English. I mean, they had that, but they were Americans first. Well, the Jews and all their dispersion, no matter whether they're in New York or Tel Aviv or Warsaw, wherever they're at, they're Jews. And God says, don't worry. You're going to be dispersed, but I'm there for you. He extends this message to the ultimate final comfort. In Isaiah 43 through 5, it opens with the ministry of John the Baptist, one crying in the wilderness, quoted by all four Gospels. Okay? Like I said, Isaiah 40 has been fulfilled, literally, and to the point. Because when they came to John, they said, who are you? He quoted Isaiah 43 through 5. All four Gospel accounts tell us that. You think God said it was important? Yeah, it was important. It's important for us, but you know who it was important for? Were the people of Israel at the time. The key was if they were willing, Jesus said that all the time, and they were attentive, then they would have known. Remember, when John the Baptist was in prison, he sent men to Jesus and said, are you the one or do we look for another? And then he quoted Isaiah. The lame see, the blind walk, the prisoners are set free. And he told John's disciples, go back and tell John, this is what you saw. In other words, yes, John, I am the one Isaiah spoke about. It was an affirmation. But what was the issue? Well, the issue is the same thing today. Do you care? Do you want? Why do people reject God? Is he not loving enough? No. It's their pride. They don't want. At the end, when people don't come to Christ, it's not because they have intellectual problems, is it? No.
They're too blind.
Well, but it's not.
They're higher IQ unless they look at God.
But what's going on? Pride, worship themselves. You know what it comes down to? It's that three-letter word that we all carry, we were born with tattooed on our foreheads. You know what that three-letter word is? Sin. See, people don't have an intellectual problem about God. They have a sin problem. What's that sin problem? They love their sin more than they love the consequences. What does God say about the soul that sins? Surely die. So what does people say? Well, see, you see it today. Okay, I'm not picking on anybody if you ever did or if you do smoke. What do we know about smoking? Good or bad? Unequivocally bad. But do people just say, bad, I'm going to stop? No. Why? Because they like what they've got versus what they have to go through not to. And when you have sin in your life, what you're saying is, I like the sin more than not having the sin in my life. Think about this. Same idea. What happens if you jump out of an airplane without a parachute from 30,000 feet? Dead. Do people do it? Yeah. Not intentionally.
I know, they do it.
They don't do it intentionally. But they do these other things. See, people have sin in their life, and they like their sin. They love their sin greater than not having their sin. So God says in his message that he points out the feebleness of man and the brevity of life. He makes this point about God's eternal word. But he has a loving concern for the broke. In Isaiah 48, the grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of God stands forever. And that's what you have to look at and say, well, what does God say? Because I'm not going to be here, you're not going to be here for very long. God says you're like the grass. And all you got to do is walk around Phoenix in the summertime and see what happens with grass when it's not watered. It doesn't last very long, does it? No, it doesn't. Isaiah lashes out at the foolishness of idolatry in this section. He makes this point, and he's repeated it, and other prophets, and God is logical. He wants you to look at it logically. He says, you go out and cut down a tree. You form it, you shape it, or you have someone else do it. You overlay it in gold or silver. You carry it around, and then you foolishly set it down and you worship it. What God is saying is, do you see how, okay, this is a big word, ugly word, stupid that is? That's what he's saying. How foolish. How foolish. Because the word says, the heavens declare the glory of God. God says all you have to do is you can look up at the stars and take them and watch them and follow them and realize that star there today, 1 year from now, guess what? It's going to be right there again. It's quote-unquote like clockwork. You can't look at that and say it all happened by chance. Couldn't happen by chance. Couldn't happen by chance. So God says his word's eternal. You're feeble. You're not going to last. Make peace, Isaiah 1. Come now, let us reason together. Though your sins are crimson, I'll make them as white. God just says, let's talk about this. Let's look about this. And Isaiah is really preaching the same thing. The false idols can do nothing. And his message is, the message is, that which the true prophets are saying, when it comes to pass, will prove that their message is from God. And the fact that the message of the false prophets does not come true should prove to you that they're not of God. And actually what he's looking at is come down the road to the fall in Jerusalem. The false prophets were telling the people, this is where God is. You're not going to have to worry. You're not going to go into captivity. Well, Babylon broke the wall through 3 times. And the 3rd time was when they finally destroyed it. And that's what Isaiah is telling them. When it comes, because that's why he said, I'm telling you so when it comes, you know I said it. You got a false prophet saying it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. When it happens, know that I told you it was going to happen. And it should be your alert that Isaiah, Hosea, Micah, Amos, and Joel, and all these other prophets that have been telling you stuff, they were true and they were accurate. And with that, you should listen to what they say. Because what did God say? He always told them, repent. When Babylon came, the prophets, Jeremiah says, whoever goes out to the Babylonians will survive. If you stay in here and resistance was literally futile. You were going to die. And if you ran away on your horses, they're going to find you. If you dug into a cave, God says, I'm going to send them to get you. And if I don't get you that way, I'll get you with pestilence. And I'll send the vipers. I'll send the lions. You're going to die. Who came? Those who believed. Who did not come? Those who didn't believe. Right? Then he makes the prophecy about the coming king, the prophet. And his ministry will be marked by justice, and he will not pervert it. One of the judgments against the nation was the judges were pervert. They took money, they took bribes. And the key is, in Isaiah's message, he says, although it will look like the prophet, Messiah, Christ, ministry is a failure, i.e. the crucifixion, he says, ultimately, it will survive the resurrection, the ascension. He'll come back and he will establish his kingdom. When he establishes his kingdom, he will draw all men unto himself. That's what he says. And Isaiah is giving this message. His promises, he says, he one day will redeem the nation, saying, fear not, I have redeemed you, I have called you by your name, you are mine. God made Israel. He formed them. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. He brought them out of the land of Egypt. He says, when you pass through the waters, i.e. the Red Sea, when you cross the torrid rivers, the Jordan, I delivered you. He's showing through Isaiah, I am your God. And I have a purpose and a plan for you. And even though it looks bad, I am judging you. He started with comfort. You've received twice what you deserved because you were mine, and I am disciplining you. When will they do this? Bible says, when they say, blessed is he, when they look on him whom they have pierced, the day when Christ returns, they will see him and they will realize their sin. Now, in Romans and Zechariah, he says, a third part through fire, refined as silver, will be refined and tested as gold. They will call on my name. Who will God save? Of Israel? See, here's where we get a little disconnect sometimes. We'll end with this. People go, oh, it's all of them. Well, it's all of who? Zechariah, all who will call on my name. Paul says, not all Israel is Israel. Okay? He says in Romans 9, for they are not all Israel who are of Israel, nor are they all children because they are the seed of Abraham. But, quote, in Isaac your seed shall be called. That is, those who are the children of the flesh are not the children of God, but the children of promise are counted as a seed. What is he talking about? It's what Zechariah said. All who call on the name of the Lord will be saved. What it is, the nation Israel will be preserved because they'll maintain their identity. But who will it be? Those who call on the name of the Lord. It's no different from them, for them or for you or I, which is what Paul says in Ephesians. He says that in the Christ, in Ephesians 1, he took the two, Jew and Gentile, and he made them, he didn't make them Jews, did he? No. Did he make the Jews Gentiles? No. He says he would take the two and make them one new. We are new in Christ. But we got to end with that. I gave you some Bible, I gave you a lot of references to look up if you want. But the promise of God never fails. And the issue that Israel faced was that even though they had a good king, as soon as they got a bad king, the truth of their heart was revealed because what did they do? Ran after the sin. And again, that's the thing for believers. Are you there because your parents are doing it? Are you there because you have a great pastor and leaders that keep telling you that? Or are you there because God in your heart has spoken and that's who you are? Do you want to go after sin, or are you repulsed at the sin in your life and seek out to God like the publican saying, Lord, have mercy on me, I'm a sinner? Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for your word, and we thank you for the proof of your never-ending love. Even in rebellion, that those who turn to you, you will receive. You offer grace and mercy because you're not willing for any to perish. Lord, help us to be that light in a dark world, and help us, Lord, to be used by you to glorify you. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Thank you, everybody.